We have 20 minutes for open discussion, and the floor is open, please. Thank you, Your Eminence. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Chair. I have two brief questions. One is for Rohington. I was wondering, in reference to your exposition on IPs and the dangers of the IP concentration and the whole protection of IP, how do you see it interplaying with antitrust practice and regulation? In the last years, we've seen diminishing in its using as being of a tool against concentration, but maybe you can think of ways of addressing the problem of IP and how to tackle it from the antitrust perspective. Then I have a brief question for Juan regarding the role of the multilaterals in fighting poverty and expanding development. And I was wondering, how do you see the tension with multilaterals as issuers in the capital markets and the demands from credit rating agencies? To what point this tension create problems for the fostering of the own purpose and objective of multilaterals, and how do you see this tension playing out in the future? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I guess I'd begin with the point where you did, that it's the nature of this business is to create what appear to be natural monopolies, just because there's such a high upfront cost. And so at least in the early stages, you will find that average costs keep decreasing, and therefore bigness is better. In the data world, it's compounded by the fact that the more data you have, the better you become and the sharper you become, because it's data that feeds the quality of your algorithm. So in response, I'd say two or three things. One, just because something is inherently a natural monopoly, and you look around us, whether it's in power generation or in anything, does not mean that we have only one. So I mentioned the 3 data zones, and so it seems to me that there is room for public action to still create space, whether it's through infant industry or some other way, to have more parts of the world and more players involved. So that's one thought. The second is, if something is absolutely going to become that way, then you go to a next best solution, which is much more effective taxation. I completely understand that if there's 160-something countries in the world, not all of them will become good and monopolies in some subset of the data world. But that shouldn't prevent you from at least, and that's why I take the point about cooperation around taxation, and indeed the point about power that Jeff made seriously. But this is why we have multilateral public action. It is precisely to get over these issues of power and so on. Third, there's lots of room. If you look at the countries that have succeeded in the data world and in innovation more broadly, it's interesting. South Korea, Taiwan, Israel. These are not countries that can all say, we're big, therefore we're best, or we were first. So there's a combination of really intelligent public action along with entrepreneurship that makes the difference. And just because something is a natural monopoly should not prevent us from pursuing all of these other routes as well.
Well, it's a very interesting question, and I will address it from a point of view of our case. We are a regional bank, and there's a difference in between the more global banks and ourselves. Global banks have a lot of donors as shareholders, which, in fact, for the rating agencies, I mean, they are all the callable capital from these donors is considered and is into for the possibility of leveraging in the markets. In our case, our five member countries are also borrowers at the same time, and only in one of the cases of Moody's, I mean, Uruguay is taking Uruguay callable capital is taking into account for the possibility of leveraging. So that's one of the differences. Our regional banks, we do need to have a lot more capital in paid in capital in order to lend more. And that's one of the, I would say, one of the big restrictions and differences we have with the other banks. And in fact, I mean, we had all the process to get for the first time a rating in the last few years. And on one sense, I mean, the participation of the rating agencies was quite helpful in order to for the structuring internally the bank. And in fact, I mean, at the moment we managed to get a very good rating. We have an A rating when the average rating of 5 countries is B, so it's pretty low, or B minus at the moment. So I think having good policies is a good possibility in working with the rating agencies. On the other hand, these restrictions, as I mentioned before, of not considering, of not being able to take into account callable capital from our countries, really is a disadvantage. So I have a mixed feelings with in that sense. I mean, being very positive, the help of the rating agencies. On the other hand, there is a battle I think we still have to give in order to have some more flexibility and recognitions that, I mean, I think in most of our development banks, I mean, there has never been, or very rarely, well, very few cases that countries that didn't default on the multilateral banks. And in that sense, I think there should be some more flexibility and consideration in the future.
Okay. I first want a couple comments on Rohinder's remarks about intellectual property and digital information. I mean, the first is that the ILO had a commission almost more than 15 years ago on the social dimensions of globalization. And one of the things they called for was TRIPS minus to revise, think about that, particularly in the context of, say, medicines. And the unfortunate thing is that the world since then has gone to TRIPS plus, with making it more difficult to get access to generic medicines as a result of provisions like data exclusivity. One of the interesting things that has happened is that in the new agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, actually there was an improvement in the provisions at the demand of the Democrats, so that the access to generic medicines is actually better than it was earlier. But in the area of data, the new agreement is entrenching some of the bad regulatory framework that the United States currently has, in contrast to what has gone on in Europe. And that's a really important thing. This is going on not only in that agreement, but also in the U.S.-Japan agreement. So one provision in that the U.S. has is Section 230, which is the immunity of the platforms from liability for whatever they put out on the platform, which is one of the main reasons why there's so much misinformation and disinformation going out over the platforms. That immunity gave them freedom to do everything. And that provision, an immunity, is entrenched in the new trade agreements. And it's an important warning for any country when they sign these agreements that really they're tying themselves down to a particular view of the internet, and one I think that's very misguided, very dangerous, and very different from that that is going on in Europe. On the issue of access to knowledge related to climate change, to technologies that will relate to emissions. In the original Rio Agreement in '92, there was a provision for compulsory licensing, but the United States has walked away from that agreement. And I think it's important for the rest of the world to now say, you know, that was the global framework for dealing with climate change. And if we're going to really deal with it, it's really important for us to go back to what we agreed to almost 30 years ago in the Rio Agreement. Then I want to emphasize that some people have thought that the way to deal with the digital problems is to give individuals property rights in their data. That's not going to be a solution. Let me say, you know, I was in a meeting where one of the heads, CEO of one of the big companies bragged that he could get people to sell them all their data for a few dollars a month, and that they had no idea about the value of their data. So he was almost bragging how he could exploit other people and then have all that data, and as you say, giving him enormous amounts of monopoly power. And we're already beginning to see the ability of these companies to go into other areas like banking where they can use that data and in some cases efficiently, but some cases for purposes of exploitation. So there will need to be a very strong regulatory framework, not only for the use of data, the keeping of data, the whole, in all these areas in liability. And I think your suggestion of trying to have a digital stability board or some framework of thinking about this in an area that's evolving very quickly, I think is very, very important. Then I have a question for Michael about whether he'd like to speculate about, you know, a lot of people looking at Chile say Chile's inequality has come down a little bit. They've done a great job in reducing poverty. Why are the protests now? Why weren't they earlier? And, you know, what interpretation do you give about the occurrence of these and the form they're taking at the current time?
Thanks, Joe, for the question. I don't think anybody really knows. That's the honest answer. You know, I've read all the analysis, and I spoke to a lot of Chileans, and I think the fact is, I mean, the easy answer to that is there was a rate increase on the subway, but it was very modest, and it's not exactly a very powerful explanation of what happened. I think in Chile you had just a lot of things that were happening at the same time that weren't very visible and that many people didn't see. And that sort of came together, and maybe the rate increase just kind of, and the metro being sort of a symbol in some ways, just triggered a much wider protest. But I think there you had a lot of people with different grievances coming together. I don't think you could just focus on one issue. And like in Colombia, where there were also, massive protests later on, there was no real leadership. There was no single demand. And so I think there was just a discontent. And I think people have talked about, that's why I made the point about inequality. I think it's inadequate to talk about it just in economic terms, because you're right, inequality went down in Chile. and poverty has gone down considerably. But still, there is this also this kind of resentment, people just really going through a very hard time, and a lack of kind of political sensitivity on both sides of the ideological spectrum. It's not a partisan or political issue. I think it was, and in all of the countries in Latin America, I lived in Chile a couple of years, the first years of democracy after the Pinochet dictatorship, and it struck me as a country where there's disconnect between the political class and the rest of society and citizens is most pronounced. And at some point, that's just not sustainable. And so I think this was the catalyst, and that's what happened. But if I can't claim that this is an airtight explanation, but that's the best I can do.
I want to only say something about the question. And I think that this is the very important merit to have the idea of Perón, the idea of social justice in the end. Of course, not any time the leaders of this party are completely coherent and in all the sense, but the idea that the first idea to have more justice came from Perón, from the revolution to make Perón. So this was the first in Latin America, we can say. And I don't know what is the relation of this with the United States, because I don't know if the United States understand to the end the importance to put some kind of justice in the programs, in general programs. To start with the question of health, or the other question, that is more in the European countries has more solutions. So this is my question.
Alicia, you want to come into this discussion?
Thank you. I don't know how to put, yes, here we are. I just wanted to comment something on Chile. I think it's important. First of all, I think in ECLAC, we consider equality as a driver of growth, not as a result of growth, number one. And we have measured the inefficiency of inequality in many fronts. What are the costs of not having equality in education, in nutrition, and what are the effects in the economy in terms of productivity, innovation, and growth? We really believe that inequality erodes the dynamic of growth, and the culture of privilege is really something that has gone all through the region in terms of this culture of privilege that is, for example, one of its expression, of course, is tax evasion, is one form of considering the culture of privilege. And so there's not a culture of equality, but a culture of privilege that naturalizes or makes inequality look like a natural phenomena. Now, in the case of Chile, I was there, of course I've been there, I live there, but I think that the most important thing to understand is that this country has $25,000 GDP per capita, and but half of the population in working age doesn't receive more than $500 a month. And when you go to the pensions are even lower, $250 probably. 10% of their income goes to transport, public transport. And this is why probably public transport was the triggering factor when the tariffs went up 30 pesos, and they were saying it's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years. And the problem is that we have been in Chile, we have underestimated inequality. When we go and measure inequality in terms of the household surveys, we will see that the difference between the 10% richer and the 10% poorer is 7 times. But when we go to the tax registers, when we go to the administrative information, as Piketty did, we find out that it's 26 times number one. And then, of course, the 10% of the people in Chile, the wealth is 66% in total. So what we have there is a very profound inequality, a very expensive country, because education and medicines and health, if you want to have more or less a good service on these public goods, you have to pay for everything. And the households in Chile are very highly indebted. So I think this explosion, because it was really an explosion on 18 October, is a very clear, I would say a very clear phenomena of civil disobedience in relation to what they consider the model of neoliberalism. Chile was considered the best student of neoliberalism, and I think it really clashed with this concentration of wealth and income and the cost of life with very few public goods. So I think this is not the same in Colombia, not the same in Ecuador, but I would say that the thread of discontent in Latin America stems from inequality, not poverty. Poverty is also a problem, but inequality is what's hurting the most. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Would you like to speak?
I want to make a comment what Padre Ferrer said, and I want to make in Italian if you want to continue that. Quello che ha detto Padre Ferrer è estremamente profondo per noi economisti, dovremmo non retoricamente prendere quello che ha detto, ma prenderlo. Ha detto una frase che dovremmo ripensarla una e due volte. Lui ha detto: al di là dei risultati di un sistema economico, noi abbiamo bisogno di un percorso per l'individuo ex ante che dia formazione, che dia etica, che dia morale. Non è il risultato di un mercato, è qualcosa che viene prima, è qualcosa che si elabora prima, è qualcosa che si concepisce prima. E questo per noi economisti è un tema, perché quando noi andiamo a studiare questo lo vediamo come un risultato del modello, come un outcome del modello, come che il modello, il mercato tiene una failure, si correggo la failure, se non la correggo di qui, la correggo di là, ma il principio di leggerlo ex ante è così importante che dovrebbe a noi tutti gli individui mettere all'inizio l'uguaglianza come fattore di base, perché con l'uguaglianza è le risorse che ho, la etica che ho, i valori che ho, e l'individuo non è pure razionalità. E credo che noi economisti, quelli che abbiamo scritto modello, qua il mio professore Stefano, che è stato il mio professore per molti anni, noi economisti dovremmo capire questo più profondamente. E chiudo sugli economisti con un'altra cosa, un commento al mio professore Stefano, che è il seguente. Che ricordi, Stefano, quando tutti gli economisti italiani volevano applicare il modello di pensione cileno in Italia? E tutti gli economisti dicevano: noi dobbiamo cambiare il modello del riparto e andare al modello di capitalizzazione cileno e riportarlo qua. Quanti economisti? Possiamo citare nome e cognome di tutto, assertion index altissimo. Meno male che non l'abbiamo fatto. Meno male che non l'abbiamo fatto, perché se avessimo portato il modello cileno in Italia e in Europa, oggi saremmo come il Cile oggi. Quindi credo che questo dibattito è profondo, questo dibattito ci porta a insegnare l'individuo ex ante dei processi economici. Grazie.
Yes, please. Oh. Who would like? Enrique. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think it's very good that we can discuss a little bit what's going on in Latin America today, and very particularly in Chile, because Chile has always been, for the last two generations, a major point of reference for economic models and different policies. So the question, what's going on there, is very clear and very pertinent. Let me say very briefly that there has been a coincidence of many things. One thing is what Alicia just said now. The inequalities continue to be very strong. This is true. But at the same time, I think we have in some element which made some specific issue in this moment, which is the expectations of the middle classes that were created very much because of the boom of commodities in the previous 10 years. And nowadays we are confronted to a crisis of those expectations plus the visibility of inequalities. And all these kind of things make a coincidence with crisis of the political parties and the introduction of corruption in the system. So all these things together became to a moment in which we are really living with this sort of instability of the middle classes in the streets, and the incapacity of the political system to come out, to create confidence, to control and to orient those expectations, and this is what is going on here. That is to say that the crisis in expectations plus inequalities is also confronted with crisis in the political parties in their capacity to manage, to orient, and to give some hope to the existing unrest in the region. Thank you.
We have been blessed with some added minutes also, so we can take further and go deeper discussion, please. And then we will break for lunch at 1 o'clock rather than 12:30.
Just a very brief clarification to what Mario was telling us about the Chilean pension system. There is a capitalization for the whole population except for the military. The military in Chile has a solidarity system, and when the corruption arises within this sector, this is one of the main factors that arise the anger from the people there.
Please. Nope. Oh, sorry. Stefan.
No, go ahead. After you.
Thank you. Just I want to add a single reflection on the effect of what we can call the most important phenomenon in Latin America in the last year, which is the discovery of this net of corruption, which covers all the region, all the countries, which affect the stability and the governance of all our countries. We have different response to that, either in Chile, in Peru or Colombia, but you have always the same common ground, which is the extension of the corruption in all the countries, who has benefit also because of the commodities boom, in which governments have enormous amount of money to spend on public works, and also was a source of important corruption system which cover all the region. That's what I like to add. Thank you.
Cristina. Yeah, Stefano.
No, a very quick remark. Cardinal Ferrer had to leave, but I would like to stress the main point of the presentation he gave of this document, Economiche et Pecuniaria Questiones. That is the first time in the history of the Church that the dicastery, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, deals with an economic and financial matters. That is important. Why is that so? Most commentators said, but that is not the proper role of the doctrine of the faith to do that. It is the role of other dicasteries within the Vatican. But they miss the point, because that document is, the main point is the refusal of the thesis of the double morality. Now, the thesis of the double morality, about which we economists, we never talk about, it's a fundamental point. You know, in 1968, Albert Carr, an American economist, published in the Harvard Business Review an article whose title is Business Bluffing Ethical? Question mark. And if you read the article, it says yes, because the ethical rules for finance should, not are, but should be different from the ethical rules which can be applied to the rest of the economy. That is the beginning of the thesis of the double morality. And this document which Cardinal Ferrer presented, says, no, we cannot accept that, because the economic world is run by a unique set of ethical rules. And unless we take a position on that, there is nothing to be done, in my opinion. Because the example that Albert Carr and immediately afterwards Milton Friedman congratulated him, saying, yes, you said the right thing, because finance has nothing to do with the rest of the economy. And the basic rule of finance is like that of the poker. You have to cheat. It's written like that. The banker is a cheater and has to cheat, because otherwise the mechanism will not run. After that, a few other people, like John Ladd, try to modify a bit the language, but the content was the same. So this document has that is the reason why the doctrine of the faith has to produce a document on financial matters, which from a certain point of view have nothing to do with it. Thank you.
I'm actually very grateful for having listened to the second comment. My first question is on the choice for Latin America in a world where, as you described, there are now 3 zones, 3 models of how to go about data. And I would be interested, how do you see Latin America making a choice? There is a view on the necessity to go beyond the digital board you described towards a world data organization. What is your opinion on that? Is this necessary? And more importantly, is this feasible? How would you describe that? And then, if I may, just a quick comment on the discussion on ethical finance. And actually, it is a question more to those who represent the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, a wonderful speaker, Cardinal Ladaria, left, but maybe others would have a view on that. We are seeing some encouraging signs of linking religion and ethics in finance. For example, Malaysia is making strides in that direction of Islam and ethical finance. They are actually, they were the first to issue, I believe, a sukuk linked to the SDGs. I'm looking at the World Bank representatives because I think the World Bank was instrumental in that. What is the practical way in which the Catholic Church can walk its own talk and direct its own financing towards a new model of focus? Again, going back to Malaysia, it is to be seen, but they seem to think that they can be strongly a proponent of climate action through linking ethics and finance. Do we see a potential for coming together on that issue, perhaps in a seminar right here? I look at the host, and bring this topic at focus. And if the answer is yes, I can tell you I will. I mean, I don't know about the bank, probably they would like to be here, but definitely the fund will be here if you take that discussion forward. Thank you.
Let me take a run at the 2 questions that were posed. One is, what might Latin America's choices be? And second, do we need, and even if we needed one, is it possible to create new global institutions? On the first point, I'd sort of riff off one of Joe's observations on the way trade is now being adjudicated and Sergio's question. And I'd say, in addition to the use of safe harbor provisions, which protect digital platforms from being publishers, and the US is consciously promoting this through bilateral negotiations because it has more power. The other thing I'd look out for, Joe, there is data localization, which is the other thing in USMCA where there's a one-sentence clause that says data localization is not on, period. I'm not a small Latin American country. I'm Canadian. I'm worried about this. Because it is through localization of data that some of the national strategies that I've alluded to can be followed. And so, Sergio, your point about natural monopoly. What if I'm Brazil, or if I'm India, or even if I'm a collection of countries, what's the proverbial cliche? What do I have most of? My people. What do people generate tons and tons and tons of data? What do we need to be really sharp in today's world? Lots and lots of data. So I'd say the infant industry argument, the commanding heights argument, the gains from cooperation so that you can create your own space here exists for the large majority of countries. And there's no reason to see these 3 data zones as given because they weren't given forever. I think there's really room for all the countries that don't belong in them, and there's room for almost Pearsonian multilateralism to make these zones talk to each other and to create harmony where it otherwise didn't exist. And so my colleague and I, and it's going to be published in Project Syndicate next week, make the case for we're in a Bretton Woods moment for the digital era. And we need, rather than think about we have these institutions, can we use one more, we need to rethink almost in that San Francisco Bretton Woods mold. And so your point about new institution, I take it. I take the point that there might not be an appetite. I'd say, number one, what are the costs of not addressing this issue through an institution like that? Second, it doesn't have to be a new institution. I think existing institutions can take the digital world more seriously. And just as we created a kind of fourth leg for Bretton Woods through the FSB, we might want to think about that kind of non-treaty-based process through which we get at some of these issues. But that shouldn't prevent the Bretton Woods Troika or anyone else, including national and regional cooperation, from making strides here. It is greenfield territory. If Estonia is cited as a leader in this field, surely that gives hope to lots and lots of small countries.
I think, what can we do? About the data, I don't want to speak, we have a meeting about this in the academy, but I don't want to go back to this problem. I want, on the contrary, to speak, what can do the church? You asked this. Yeah, of course. We can organize a seminar here. But I want to say that the Pope gave an encyclical about this question. More than this is not easy. It's an encyclical to just of the subject of the climate change that follow the ideas of the academy. I say this because many people criticize the Pope, especially of the right wing, to say the Pope followed the ideology of the sociologists, and no, the Pope followed the ideas of the Academy of Sciences that for 20 years speak about the climate change. So the Pope followed his academy. And this is very important because was the first Pope to put in the center this question that came from sciences. I say, Professor Stiglitz this morning, here was the beginning of this reflection. And the second question was very important, the synod that we have recently about Amazonia, about Brazil, about the situation in Brazil. This was a synod moved by the Cardinal Humes, Brazilian cardinal, to say, look, we need really to defend the problem of climate change, we need to study the question of Brazil, especially the Amazonia, that is the great font of the climate. And we have a very important discussion in this synod. We have 1 month with all the bishops of all the church, but especially Latin America. And it was very interesting because some bishops from Africa say, but what is the originality of this question? Because we have the same problems. And yes, but in the end, they understand that the Church of Latin America really have a reivindication of the justice. And of course, also in relation with the climate, but also in relation with the people, because there are bishops to work martyrs to defend the people. And this really, I think, was a great contribution. And we hope and we wait for the document that is maybe this week or the other week was published. So this, but we can organize another meeting, of course. Thank you.
Bravo. I want to share one thing that I've learned very well over the years, which is if you want the best reading list in the world, ask Stefano Zamagni, who knows everything that's ever been written, by the way, in every language, and it's amazing. But I want to read, if I could, just a paragraph from the article that he just told us about. I never knew this article. Is business bluffing ethical? Because it's very pertinent. This is the American way. He writes in 1968, we live in what is probably the most competitive of world civilized societies. Our customs encourage a high degree of aggression in the individual striving for success. Business is our main area of competition, and it has been ritualized into a game of strategy. The basic rules of the game have been set by the government, which attempts to detect and punish business frauds. But as long as a company does not transgress the rules of the game set by law, it has the legal right to shape its strategy without reference to anything but its profits. If it takes a long view of its profits, it will preserve amicable relations so far as possible with those with whom it deals. A wise businessman will not seek advantage to the point where he generates dangerous hostility among employees, competitors, customers, government, or the public at large, except if you're certain the President of the United States. But decisions in this area are, in the final test, decisions of strategy, not of ethics. And this is completely relevant. This is not a hypothetical. This is exactly the line of Wall Street in 2008, which said when they cheated their counterparts by selling toxic assets, well, they're big boys. I don't have to. This was the line of Lloyd Blankfein, who remains the head of, is he still the head of? No, he just stepped down from Goldman, sorry. But they're cheaters. And if you live in this social circle, which I watch closely, like Joe, and we get to see it close up, they honor each other for the competency of their cheating. One of the highest, most respected people on Wall Street is John Paulson, who cheated IKB Bank of Germany of $1 billion. And Goldman was the partner in this fraud. Goldman paid a fine. Paulson did not pay a fine at all. He kept the billion. He gave $400 million of it to Harvard, and they named the engineering school after Paulson. I suggested that they call it the IKB Engineering School of Harvard University because it was German money that gave it, but the president of the Harvard was not amused by my non-amusing statement. But he kept the money, and he remained a hero of the hedge fund industry. So this is not mere idle talk. This is the actual determination of how the world economy works by the very center of finance in the world. And it's not just that some people aren't ethical, it is that the absence of ethics is the normative standard of the community, not the exception. It is absolutely the normative standard. So I just thought this is look it up. You can find it online. It's a great reference. Rob. I'm sorry, say it again? Yes, and he said we're doing God's work. Different church.
I think, Jeff,
Yes, Joe.
I want to follow up on Kristalina's remark about putting your money where your mouth is. One of the problems is our legal framework where universities, endowments, pension funds have a fiduciary responsibility which is often defined in terms of maximizing returns without any other, and that maximizing returns has come to mean short-term returns and not looking at climate. Union pension funds are not allowed to look at the characteristics of the companies with respect to how they treat workers. I mean, it really is a very strange world where they've written the rules in the legal framework to make it very difficult for those who would like to pursue these broader perspectives to do that. And I think one of the first elements of a policy agenda is to change the rules and to make it a fiduciary responsibility to look at these things from a broader social perspective.
Joe, I have a two-hander, just one sentence. It is a very difficult topic to wrestle with your pension fund committee that is mandated, but colleagues from the World Bank can talk about this in terms of the pension fund of the World Bank and steps that have been taken to increase the alignment between what we preach and where we put our money. And I think it is an important topic of conversation. I still think, Marcelo, that we might have that as in your hospitable manner to continue it at some point, how we can do what Joy's talking about to make it easier for those who manage publicly invested money to do a better job in that alignment. Yeah. So it is possible, very difficult, possible.
We are at I think we had one more comment, please. Yes. Last one of the morning session.
Thank you. An easy question. Well, Juan Notaro said about the learnings of his life about Enrique Iglesias in his career, professional life, taking advantage of the presence of Enrique Iglesias here and his experience in the last 30 years in the multilateral bank. I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of the multilateral bank in the next 30 years?
But 2-minute answer for a very pithy answer.
I think they have a very important role adapting to the new circumstances. This is a new world coming in, with a lot of uncertainties, a lot of problems, but also a lack of leaders to organize the public opinion. And that is probably the thing that worries me more now, is looking to Latin America, is the crisis of the political parties and those people who can really talk to the people and sell their ideas and manage their expectations. In this field, I mean, the international organization, we have to adapt to all these realities. I think they have a role. It was mentioned also here very wisely that we must recognize the new realities to organize a new way to manage those institutions. But I think the question is to be realistic in terms of recognize the new realities, what has to be done, and how we can communicate those things and manage the public opinion in the right direction. What we are having now in our region is a crisis of the political parties, lack of leaders, many ideas, but very few people able to communicate them. Thank you.
Join me in thanking all of the presenters for a wonderful, wonderful morning. We will now have a lunch. We'll have to be timely to be back here
3.
Absolutely in our place at 3 o'clock. Very, very important.
Yes.
And
2:45.
2:45 in our seats for a very exciting afternoon. So please, we'll go for lunch now. This is great.